Imagine walking into a courtroom and seeing a pig standing where the defendant should be. The judge is wearing official robes, witnesses are waiting, a lawyer is preparing an argument, and everyone is acting as if the animal understands exactly what is happening. This was not a comedy sketch. Across parts of medieval and early modern Europe, animals were formally accused of crimes. Pigs were prosecuted for killing people. Rats were summoned for destroying crops. Insects were ordered to leave entire regions. Some animals even received lawyers. These proceedings followed two different systems. Secular courts usually handled individual animals accused of harming a person. Church courts dealt with swarms, pests, and creatures that threatened harvests. To the people involved, both kinds of cases could be serious attempts to restore order. Today, we are counting down 7 of the strangest animal trials ever recorded. Some survive in detailed legal documents. Others are famous stories built from later accounts, so whenever the evidence becomes uncertain, we will say so. Either way, they reveal a world where the boundary between law, religion, nature, and superstition was very different from our own. Number 7. The Sow and 6 Piglets of Savigny. In 1457, in the Burgundian village of Savigny, a young child was killed by pigs. The court did not simply order the animals destroyed. A sow and her 6 piglets were treated as defendants in a legal case, complete with accusations, testimony, and a formal judgment. The sow was found guilty. The surviving record states that she was delivered to the executioner and hanged by her hind feet from a tree. The 6 piglets created a more complicated problem. They had reportedly been found near the victim and were stained with blood, but nobody could prove exactly what each piglet had done. The judge therefore separated suspicion from evidence. The piglets were acquitted because there was not enough proof to connect them directly to the killing. Their owner had to promise to produce them again if new evidence appeared. It is a bizarre detail, but it sounds surprisingly familiar. The court refused to convict every defendant simply because they belonged to the same group. This case is one reason historians warn against dismissing animal trials as random madness. The people involved used real legal procedure. They recorded ownership, weighed evidence, distinguished between defendants, and issued different sentences. The animals could not understand any of it, but the humans believed the process mattered. Number 6. The Rooster that Laid an Egg. Basel, Switzerland, 1474. A rooster was accused of doing something impossible, laying an egg. To modernize, the most likely explanation is that the bird had been misidentified or possessed an unusual biological condition. But to many people at the time, a rooster's egg was not merely strange, it was dangerous. Folklore claimed that such an egg could produce a basilisk, a legendary creature associated with poison and death. In a society deeply afraid of witchcraft and violations of the natural order, the bird became more than an animal. It became evidence that something evil might be happening. Later chronicles describe a formal conviction and a public execution by fire, with the supposed egg destroyed beside the rooster. Some dramatic details come from sources written long after the event, so historians debate exactly how much of the popular version is reliable. But the core Basel story appears repeatedly in historical accounts. What made the case frightening was not the rooster itself. It was the idea that nature had broken its rules. The court allowed people to turn that fear into an official judgment. Instead of admitting that they did not understand what they had seen, they gave the mystery a criminal, a sentence, and an ending. Number 5. The Rats of Autun. One of the most famous animal trial stories begins when rats were accused of eating local barley. The court supposedly summoned every rat in the district to appear. Unsurprisingly, not a single defendant arrived. That absence created a legal question. Could the trial continue if the accused had not safely received the summons? The rats were associated with a young lawyer named Barthélemy de Chasseneuze. According to the traditional story, he argued that a notice read in one place was not enough because the defendants were scattered across many villages. When the court issued a broader summons and the rats still failed to appear, he produced an even better excuse. The roads, he argued, were filled with cats. Requiring the rats to travel to court would expose them to mortal danger. Until the authorities guaranteed safe passage, their absence was reasonable. It was a ridiculous image, but the argument used a real principle. A defendant should not be punished for failing to make an unsafe journey. There is an important catch. Recent archival research has challenged the familiar date of 1522 and even questions whether the trial happened exactly as later writers described. Chassaneuz definitely wrote about legal actions involving animals, but the neat popular version may combine real practice with later storytelling. Even as a disputed case, the story survived because it perfectly captures the logic of animal trials. Once a court pretended that rats were ordinary defendants, a clever lawyer could demand that the court respect every protection an ordinary defendant deserved. If you enjoy entertaining explanations of history's strangest moments, subscribe. It helps this channel keep turning bizarre true stories into documentaries with very questionable drawings. Now back to the courtroom, because the next defendants were too small to arrest. Number 4. The Weevils of Saint-Julien. In the 16th century, the vineyards around Saint-Julien in Savoy were attacked by insects often described as weevils. The creatures damaged valuable plants, so the community brought the problem before an ecclesiastical court. Since nobody could place an entire swarm in a cell, the case focused on spiritual authority. The insects were represented by legal counsel. Their defenders argued that animals had been created by God and therefore possessed a right to live and eat. The villagers answered that the pests were destroying land on which human families depended. The dispute began to resemble a property case between two communities. One proposed solution was almost unbelievable. The humans would give the insects a separate piece of land where they could feed without damaging the vineyards. Lawyers then debated whether the offered territory was actually suitable. If the land could not support them, forcing the insects there would hardly be a fair settlement. The surviving paperwork is incomplete, and part of the record was reportedly damaged in a way later writers enjoyed blaming on insects. We do not know whether the court reached a final enforceable decision. Of course, even a perfect judgment would not have persuaded a swarm to read a boundary marker. But that misses the point. The proceeding allowed frightened farmers to turn an uncontrollable natural disaster into a structured argument. When crops meant survival, insects were not a minor inconvenience. A courtroom provided rules, responsibility, and the hope that the universe still had an order. Number 3. The Pig of Falaise. The best-known animal prosecution took place in Normandy in 1386. A sow belonging to a local man killed an infant. Unlike many colorful stories from the Middle Ages, the core of this case is supported by an archival payment record for the executioner's work. The animal was convicted and publicly punished. Later accounts say the sow was dressed in human clothing and mutilated in a way that mirrored the injuries suffered by the child before being executed. A large crowd gathered, and local pigs were reportedly brought to witness the punishment. That last detail sounds absurd, but it reveals what the spectacle was designed to accomplish. The execution was not only about removing a dangerous animal, it was a public performance of justice. Authorities wanted the community to see that a horrifying death had been answered, and that social order had been restored. For centuries, a painting in a church at Falaise was said to commemorate the event. It later disappeared, and some theatrical details are known mostly through accounts written afterward. The executioner's receipt, however, makes the basic prosecution difficult to dismiss as pure legend. Pigs wandered freely through many medieval streets, eating waste close to homes and children. Fatal attacks were therefore a real danger. Without modern ideas of animal control, insurance, or public liability, punishing the animal itself gave the community a visible target for its anger and grief. Number 2. The Pigs of Pont-de-l'Arche. In 1408, another case appeared at Pont-de-l'Arche in Normandy. Records summarized by historians describe pigs being prosecuted after the death of a child. The animals were sentenced, and the local government paid the costs connected to keeping and executing them. Those expenses matter because boring financial documents can be stronger evidence than dramatic stories. A legend might invent speeches, costumes, and cheering crowds. An account book quietly records food, chains, guards, transport, or payment to an executioner. It shows that officials treated the event as administrative work. Pigs appear in animal trials more often than almost any other large animal. They lived close to humans, were strong enough to cause fatal injuries, and often moved freely through crowded settlements. When tragedy occurred, they were easy to identify, capture, own, and place under a court's authority. The trial also protected human systems of responsibility. If a pig could be labeled the criminal, Difficult questions about negligent owners, unsafe streets, and poor supervision became less urgent. The community could punish one visible body and declare the danger resolved, even when the conditions that created it remained. Number 1. The Beetles ordered to leave. In the late 15th century, communities in the region of what is now Switzerland and eastern France pursued legal action against crop-eating insects. One famous tradition describes beetles being summoned and ordered to withdraw from cultivated land. Like the weevil case, the proceeding treated an ecological crisis as a dispute that spiritual and legal authority might settle. The insects could not speak, so representatives spoke for them. Human advocates could argue that the creatures were part of creation and needed somewhere to live. Farmers could argue that their own survival depended on the harvest. Behind the comedy was a real conflict over food, land, and disaster. Courts sometimes issued formal commands, curses, or threats of excommunication against pests. That sounds meaningless today, but rituals can serve people even when they do nothing to the animals. A public proceeding allowed a community to agree on what was happening, assign meaning to it, and perform a collective response. Animal trials gradually disappeared as legal systems changed, and explanations of animal behavior, disease, and ecology developed. Responsibility shifted toward owners and institutions. Courts became less willing to treat animals as morally guilty participants in human society. Yet these trials were not simply proof that everyone in the past was stupid. They were attempts to force chaos into a framework. A dead child, a destroyed vineyard, or a failed harvest could feel unbearable when nobody could explain why it happened or prevent it from happening again. The strangest part is not that medieval people placed animals on trial. It is how familiar their need for order still feels. When something frightening happens, humans search for a cause, a guilty party, and a ritual that makes the world appear controllable again. 7 cases, from accused piglets and a supposedly egg-laying rooster to lawyers defending rats and insects. Which trial did you find the most unbelievable? Let me know in the comments, and subscribe for more strange history, bizarre science, psychology, mysteries, and unbelievable true stories.